Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Shift Show with Rachel Bourne. My guest today is Ruben Moreno. He's the co founder and partner at Blue Rock Human Capital, where he helps organizations and leaders navigate transformation. He particularly has helped me navigate change and transformation in my own life. And so I'm super excited to have him on and share his expertise with you guys today. Blue Rock covers executive search, succession planning, leadership development, and coaching, and his career has sat at the intersection of placement and performance and personal growth. So he's one of those really rare advisors who helps executives not only get the role, but also grow with it, and with the self-awareness and adaptability and perspective to thrive through constant change. So in this conversation, we're going to unpack some of these unwritten rules of career change and reinvention and how senior leaders can manage identity shifts, engage with search partners authentically, and to build the kind of credibility that sustains long-term success. So Ruben, welcome to the Shift Show. It's such a privilege to have you.
Rachel, thank you for having me. I'm excited. Looking forward to the conversation.
You have been incredibly helpful in, my career and as I have thought about, my own sort of change and journey. And so I'm really happy to get to share your expertise and thoughts and process with our audience. I think it'll be incredibly helpful, especially as people are going into the new year. Everyone's doing like new freshes, all of that kind of stuff. Just before we jump in, I'd love if you could just do kind of like a really just quick introduction about you and Blue Rock and how you got into the executive search and coaching space.
Sure. I'll share with you, my first career, as you know, I was in human resources. I did that for 15 years. And the quick way I describe it is HR executive turned HR executive recruiter. And so I've now, coming up on 21 years in the executive search business from an HR perspective. And 10 years ago, co-founded what was at the time Blue Rock Search. In July of this year, went through an entire rebranding effort and change in team, values of the services that we offer. So now what was Blue Rock Search is now Blue Rock Human Capital, and we've expanded our service offering beyond just search, and been getting quite a positive response on a couple of key products. Like for instance, we have a cadre now of executive coaches. We're doing
Hmm.
executive onboarding, and probably the one I'm pretty excited about for next year is what we're calling NPLA, which is Newly Placed Leader Alignment. It's an offshoot of executive coaching, but it's specifically designed for how do you onboard an internal promotion? So the director who's a VP or the VP that goes to the C-suite, there's a whole new set of skills and things that somebody needs to know. And for an internal promotion, because they're not coming in from the outside, most of our clients are actually not doing anything about that. So
That's a really interesting gap in the market, actually. I love that. Well, you definitely are taking a very human-centric lens to it too, and particularly with your even organizational change, going into the new year, there's like the biggest theme, regardless of anything, is change. And so I'm really interested in your perspective, whether it's yourself and like coaching others, you work with leaders in transition significantly. What is that trigger that you really see people kind of get to points with where I need a change in my career or I want to go and do something new and they call you? What do you see as that driver behind?
there's no single answer, Rachel, as you know. So I'll share just a couple of different instances where I see it the most. 2025, we saw a lot of that where it was not something someone decided, but it was decided for them, right? We've all read of in August, 100,000 people laid off in like 35 days, right? And it was, all over, social media and so forth. So this has been a year where there's been a lot of transformation, but it also has resulted in many executives and people at all levels, but many executives finding themselves in transition. And in many instances, first time they're in a transition in 5, 10, 15 years. For someone who's in transition and it's been 15 years, the marketplace they're stepping into relative to how to manage that transition, their LinkedIn profile, their resume, all those things,
Wildly
it's
different.
completely different, right? So
Yeah.
so that's one. I didn't expect to be here, but I am. What does that mean and what do I do? The second one is I'm good at what I'm doing. I've enjoyed it, but I call it it's time. Right. And it's interesting when I have that it's time conversation, typically it's someone who really likes to build and grow things, then they really feel like the organization or the job they're in has stagnated. So they're ready for that next challenge. Or what I find, particularly with executives, is they're at a crossroads. And typically with executives who've built very broad skill set, and you and I have actually had these conversations, right? Is I call it, is it door number one, door number two, or door number three? There is no wrong decision, but you have to make the decision and then guide your efforts in that direction. Do I stay corporate, publicly traded? Do I go to private equity? We talk a lot of people about those things. Or given the skill set that I have, which is one that's highly valued in the marketplace, do I go on my own? And then what are the challenges associated with that? I think it's number one, involuntary. What do I do? Number two, it's time because, when we talk to candidates from a value proposition standpoint, when you make a decision to look elsewhere or go somewhere, it's never just one thing. It's a combination of several factors, right? Job, company, career path, money, geography. And those change at different stages of your life. So it may be the job, it may be the company,
Are those the 5? Job, company, career path, geography,
and
comp?
money. Yep.
Money? Okay. Yep. Okay.
80% of the time, if not 90%, it's going to be a combination of that.
That's a good framework.
Yeah. And so the first thing that I do when I'm having the conversation is
Mhm.
really try to help the candidate understand which one of those are they highly evaluating and which one's really important, because that also drives how you're going to manage your search.
That's a really good point, yeah, because it's all trade-offs, right?
Yeah.
And
Um,
making those choices. Interesting.
the trigger is, hey, it's time,
Mhm.
or whether it's I decided or someone decided for me, then honestly, right, that's where the work begins because then it's the conversation. I have an executive coach myself. I'm a huge believer in the process where most people think from an executive coach perspective of fundamental difference between an executive coach and a consultant, right? Because an executive coach is really asking you some really deep questions based on experiential knowledge that they have in many instances pulling from their own experiences. They're not working as an advisor or consultant, giving you, said solution. They're helping you through your own introspection get there. And so
Mhm.
those are the conversations that I have because it's really, really important for me to help the person get to what is most important to them and what is it that they're trying to accomplish. And then I can become a consultant and a career advisor and so forth. But you can't put the cart before the horse.
I think it's a really good point. It's one of the things that I've just generally seen people aren't really clear on, "This is what I want." They're like, "I'll take any job." I had, someone who was an expert on employment branding come on to the podcast recently. He was just gets so crystal clear on what that message is. It's continued to be a really good takeaway for both myself and my audience. What do you see in the people that you work with? Some navigate into change pretty well, just kind of part of the flow, and then there are others that kind of resist or it can be very overwhelming. What are the qualities that you see that are different? What helps people navigate through change?
It's interesting, right? Because I think we're all, whether it's predictive index, culture index, Myers-Briggs,
Mhm.
there's so many assessments out there, social styles inventory. By default, we're either low, moderate, or high when it comes to risk taking. Low risk taker, risk averse. So some of us are just very comfortable with this thing called change naturally, and some of us are not. So that's just called DNA, right? So what I find typically when I'm talking to candidates who are open from a change perspective, usually what I see is individuals who have worked in multiple industries. So they've already shown kind of in their career that they have a core
Adaptability
skill
in that.
set, but they can adapt and flex to the industry that that they're in. The other piece is typically that adaptability to change. Most of the candidates are also highly tech savvy, very comfortable from a technology perspective, because that is one of the places where it can get very overwhelming very quickly because of technology right now. If you're not
Yeah.
comfortable and I'm going to use a software term and agile in the world that we're coming into, what I find is candidates who are comfortable with that, not only are they comfortable with the change, but they're actually leveraging and using technology very quickly. I'm going to go back to something you said earlier. We call it in my industry market mastery. And market mastery basically says, and sometimes people confuse it with being a subject matter expert. They're fundamentally two different things. As a subject matter expert, you can know a lot about this thing called HR because, and for instance, myself, having been a former HR practitioner, it doesn't necessarily make me a market master at HR search. The market mastery comes in and says, we do one thing and we do it really well. So we're not just an executive search firm, we're an executive search firm that specifically focuses on the office of the CHRO, the office of the human capital partner, and then now to a small extent, we have higher ed practice that focuses on the office of the president. But we do one thing and we do it really well. And so people know us as that's the firm you go to if you need an HR search. Translating that from a candidate perspective, sometimes when I help a candidate put together a resume, I call it the prioritized resume format, which says you can't be all things to all people. Just because, let's say, it's a VP HR job, you don't want to apply to every VP HR job that's out there because some of those jobs will resonate with your background and they'll respond well, and others won't. So you have to be really discerning on, I want to be a VP of HR in a $500 million to $1 billion company in these industry verticals, in this geography, right? We're coming back to job, company, career
It's
plan,
so
right?
specific. I
But
know it
because what
is.
happens is, and I just read a great article on this topic right now, one of the challenges, Zapier, they're doing some phenomenal work in HR and AI. Brandon Samut's really bright head of HR.
Building agents on it the other
Yeah, and
day.
he, I think they just actually made him the chief AI transformation officer for that company. He's got
Oh, I didn't know that too. That's
a
cool.
broader title. They did a great article on why they're using AI for first interviews for incoming candidates. They're being very conscious and telling the world your first interview is going to be AI, but then they go through and they say why. And the why is, hey, for every application we're getting, candidates are using AI to both generate resume and respond. The volume is just so massive that it's overwhelming the system. So we have to leverage that AI. For me, when I think about a candidate being very specific, is the new thing when you're working your search is it's no longer just about applying. Is so for instance, and I'll use a company that you and I are familiar with. If you want to go work at Cummins in HR, what you need to do is say, look at that opening, look at the 5 or 6 key stakeholders who are there, find a way to connect with them, and basically aggressively take a networking approach to get into that community so that ultimately
Mhm.
you can potentially become a candidate. It's far broader than just the application. Why is that important in terms of being specific? From a time perspective, you can't do that with 200 companies. You have to decide, here's the 30 or 40 that I really want to work with, and here's how I'm going to work this from a networking excellence perspective, not from a job application perspective. Very long answer to your short
Yeah.
question.
And there's so much that I really hope that everyone kinda takes out of that. I mean, it's like, get super targeted in your networking. Be very clear about your value prop. Be clear about what you're willing and not to trade off, and you can't have everything, especially probably in this job market. It's really interesting kind of going through job searches. If you don't know how the back end of the system works, right? And you read that job description and you feel, I'm qualified for this. Like I could kill this job. But they also don't realize there's 100 other applicants that day that just came in. And guess what? A good 20% of them are pretty qualified too. I recently was working with a client and it was a manager role. I was really surprised. I mean, we didn't even like broadcast it anywhere, but the level and quality of talent and just this like one requisition and how much even the market has changed in the last 6 months, it was remarkable. Lot of challenges out there for job
And Rachel,
hunters.
to that point, because I work with highly qualified candidates across the country from California to New York and so forth. And for us, our president and COO, Jackie Elliott, talks about we want to continue to focus on and developing and being certified human friendly in the world of technology.
Oh, I like
And I
that.
think, in that, I also want to be cognizant there is a patience and a persistence to this process. In most instances, it is not a short process. Basically, psychologically and emotionally getting ready for this is going to take a while and it's not going to feel normal because maybe it's the first time I've ever looked for a job, or it's the first time I looked for a job in 15 years. You and I are going to have a conversation around, and I'm going to ask the question, how are you feeling? Because from an emotional perspective, when you're going through that, and Rachel, you just said it perfectly, which is what triggered it for me, is you sent it, I'm perfect for this job, and there's no response because you go into what I refer to the ATS abyss. There's a great blog I'm going to write on that, where
Black
these, yeah, the
box.
black box. And
Yes.
at some point after the second, the third, the 20th, the 30th, you start to really kind of question yourself. And that is a real emotion that people go through. Really, it has nothing to do with them. It just actually is the construct, the ecosystem we're in and so forth. Doesn't matter. You're
Yeah.
going to feel that. And over the last 20 years, particularly over the last 10, I see that a lot from my own experience. I don't wait for somebody to talk to me about that. That's, as a coach, it's
You
like,
check
hey,
in.
you're going to
Yeah.
feel this and I'm going to ask you, or maybe you're going to come and say, hey, remember that thing you said? And I just think it's a real part of the process that, that people will naturally go through.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Talk to me a little bit too about like listening to feedback because there's a lot of this sort of A B testing what works, what feels right. Oh, that wasn't the right company for you because of X, Y, and Z. There's a level of not just agility, but almost like experimentation. All right. My version of that resume didn't land well. And I even think some of it is like listening to rejection feedback. That's another one, right? Oh, I didn't land there because of these reasons. And that also not only is that an aspect of I don't wanna use the word failure, right? But there's that still feeling of rejection with some of that feedback, but there's an element of how can they be coached through it? Tell me more about that
Yeah,
side.
I think it's a great question. And, and I tell candidates as they're going through this, and, right, so it's interesting. I consider it a blessing. I coach quite a few candidates as they're going through processes with other companies and other search firms that are presenting them, and they reach out to me. So as I'm going through that, part of what I look to kind of help them understand, you really have to have the mindset that when the right one hits, it's going to be the right one. And so it's just having a mindset that says, I'm going to show up and I fully committed and I quote unquote, as they say, right, left it on the field. If that one didn't happen, that's not the one that was meant for me. It's that simple. Because
Mhm.
otherwise, there's the self doubt, there's a feeling of failure, and so forth. And so I tell
So
folks
hard.
is from a preparation perspective, in a world where we have more information available at our fingertips, you can be overly prepared. I'm a preparer, right? So there's no such thing, right? But the overly preparing is on the company, on the stakeholders, through LinkedIn, depending on what your field of expertise is. I mean, go to school because for
Yeah.
me, when you go to school on said opportunity, said organization, and said stakeholders, then you just get to show up and be yourself because no matter what happens in that conversation, you're ready. I run a search firm. I run a lot of searches. We have a fairly in-depth process, where we do that. I'm amazed at how many times they say, wow, no one's ever done this with me. I coach candidates say, okay, if no one's done it for you, then you need to do it for yourself. This is part of our model. Don't ever show up unprepared. And know that as long as you did all of those things and you showed up, if it goes through to offer, that was the one. And if it didn't, it wasn't the one. And I'm not trying to be de minimis of those feelings, but as you're going through this process, it's just a safeguard emotionally and psychologically, because anything other than that will negatively impact your ability to perform on the next one. Unfortunately, what happens is if you take that on, interestingly enough, it's self defeating because you're taking it to the next one. You just have to leave it there.
It's hard to leave it on the field, show up that way, and, "Oh, it's not the right one. I'll pick myself up, go to the next." That's how we have to also live our lives. You show up, you do your best, and in the end, if it doesn't work out, it wasn't meant to be or if they didn't like you, whatever the challenge happens to be.
And to your point, it is a learning process because you and I have had this conversation around what do you learn after your interview? Because sometimes you do your homework, you show up and you go to the interview, you say, you know what? I really don't want to do that kind of work. And that's okay, right?
Yeah,
Right. Because it's
yeah,
a two-way street. It's not just
yeah.
do I make sense for them? They have to make sense for me. And as we mature in our careers and we have a deeper toolbox and we have a much stronger sense of self mastery, here's what I'm good at. Here's what I want to do. Here are the cultures and environments that work for me. Here are the cultures, environments that I don't work. One of the things I also coach candidates on is do your due diligence from 3 or 4 key questions that no research in the world is going to give you. Those are the questions you ask when you're in front of the key stakeholders, and those answers will tell you a lot, particularly when you ask the same question of 2 or 3 stakeholders and you test for consistency.
Uh-huh.
Because you
That's
get
true.
to choose. It's been 4 or 5 months. You go through an interview
Mhm.
process. It seemed like pretty good opportunity and so forth. You go through the process, and there's something about the job, the company, and you're like, I don't think that's the one. And then you get the offer. Now what? It,
You sat through a whole bunch of red
yeah, you
flags.
just sat through
Yep.
a whole bunch of red flags. You don't think that's the one, but something is better than nothing. I have that conversation, and I will tell you, more times than not, if someone does it because it's a job, within 12 months, they're looking again because it wasn't the job.
Well, and they probably aren't showing up and performing the same way. They probably were sold something that they, didn't buy. I mean, it's all of that.
Well, and to your point, that's where I tell candidates from a due diligence perspective. When we spend a lot of time in private
Mhm.
equity these days, and there's a lot
Yeah,
of things, there's a whole language to private equity and understanding kind of you and I have had the conversation of stage matters. Where are they in their evolution? Where are they in their value thesis and so forth? All of those questions give you a really firm understanding of where that organization is and what the impact is on the role that you're signing up for. Just post transaction versus midstream towards the end, just very different stages and impact and demands on the job.
100%. Can we just double click real quick on private equity? That actually hasn't really come up in a lot of our conversations, and it's kind of a unique space. It's been an emerging and growing space. Can you just, for the audience, especially for people who aren't in private equity, tell me like what's different about the PE space that they
A
need to know?
couple of things, and again, we spent a lot of time in the HR space, so I always do a comparative to the Fortune 1000 and private equity, right? Publicly traded versus private equity. And outside of the normal differences, right? Publicly traded, shareholders, and so forth, there's a couple of things that I find to be very different. The what I'm going to call the operator mentality relative to private equity. When you think about good HR and somebody has a very strong toolbox that they would have gotten during their career, going to, some of
Mhm.
the traditionally really good HR houses, the GEs, the Honeywells of the world, and so forth. Those are great toolboxes for people to have. The interesting thing is when you go to private equity, and I was a Fortune 1000 HR person, right? So I was kind of used to that. When you come in and there's a payroll implementation to be done or a total rewards systems change or HCM, ATS, and so forth, in a large corporation, there's this thing called a COE that handles it, right? And you are a
Mhm.
stakeholder, but you're not the owner. Flip over to private equity, you're it. In the old days, they used to call us HR generalists, right? And now we're HR business
Mhm.
partners, kind of in that line of work. The fundamental difference is you have things that you were dependent on subject matter experts, i.e., the COE, that that does not exist. So now you have to set the strategy that says we're about to double or triple in size from a headcount standpoint in the next 3 years. I have to run the RFP for what's the right ATS platform to support that for an organization of our size. And when we're done with the RFP, me and my team are implementing that ATS. There's no COE. So that operator hands on that says, strategically, I have to define it. But in most instances, me and my very small team are going to make it happen. You want somebody who's comfortable being at ground level. We talk about 0, 15, 30,000 feet. You're going from 15,000 to 0 all the time, and having someone
Mhm.
who's comfortable. The other piece is, right, the language. Go ahead.
I know people who've loved that too.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like, "Rachel, I would never go back."
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen people, I have really good clients and people that I've known for years who successfully made this switch from publicly traded to PE. And they're like, I'll never go back. There's a great book on this topic called the PE Playbook by Adam Coffey. He's a former GE person who made the switch and speaks a great deal around it's not for everyone, but if you do it and you're successful at it from a long-term wealth accumulation perspective, it's pretty lucrative, even for some folks, maybe even more lucrative than the traditional publicly traded route. The second one, the key difference in private equity, the language of private equity is speed. Everything is time-based, from the due diligence process to the acquisition as they're going to the deal. And the day we do the acquisition post-transaction, we have a value creation or value thesis that says, here's our time horizon to build and add value. And so the clock is ticking. And I tell this a lot to my Fortune 1000 colleagues and clients. I think the Fortune 1000 could learn a lot from private equity relative to that time-based model. And interestingly enough, when you have a human capital partner at the PE fund level, the direct correlation between having the right talent and achieving those financial outcomes. In the PE world, we talk about, if I have the right CEO, here's where I get at month 12, 18, 24. If I misfire or mishire, here's what it costs me. And it's what in
It's
yeah,
wild.
yeah. I worked in
Swings,
the
I'm
Fortune
sure,
1000
too.
for 15 years. We never talk like that, right?
Yeah,
It's the
yeah, yeah.
speed and a very definitive assessment of talent equals this, and here's how we do it. And it's why we're really, really focused on that leadership team and how do we get them in place quickly enough. And there's some great firms out there that have done a great job of building practices on how do we go in. Remember the old days, Rachel, around forming, storming, norming, performing, right? The team dynamics as they
Mhm.
go through. Firms who
Yeah.
come in and work with PE leadership teams to help them get through that as quickly as possible, right? So
Mm.
so speed, hands on, and I think the last one is agility and change, right? Because Fortune 1000 world, when we talk about HR transformation and change, usually
It's a 3-year-long
yeah.
transformation, and
We talk in years in the publicly traded. We talk in weeks in the PE world, right? You got to be hands on, you got to be fast, and you got to be able to flex.
it's
And don't
constant.
expect that, oh, I got through that one, I get to rest. No, it's time, let's go again. And you said it perfectly. For some folks, absolutely not. And others, is like, oh my God,
Yeah,
where has this been all my life? And and
I know.
and that's what we
It's
assess
so
for as we
interesting.
go through it.
I love, though, that you really are now at this point where you're on both sides of the table. You're hiring, you're experiencing the candidates, and then you're working with the companies and the leaders. Let's talk about the companies real quick. What do they misunderstand about developing leadership pipeline? What's the one thing you wish companies would do more or
Yeah,
differently?
we've been talking, gosh, I remember years ago, gosh, I might have still been at Cornell when I read this. Workforce 2020. We're now in 2025. All of the things that we're experiencing right now, none of it is really new news. It's gotten accelerated and it's exponential now. COVID really accelerated a lot of those gaps, right? And we had the great resignation, then we had the great stay. All the while, as those things were being highlighted, what was being highlighted was nobody had really done a good job at this thing called workforce planning. And now we're talking about AI and AI's impact. And what is that going to mean from a workforce planning standpoint? It's interesting. I just sat on a Gartner webinar on CHROs and AI, and the whole focus
Mhm.
now, I think, is huge opportunity for the HR function is, hey, let's not focus on the people and the talent. Let's focus on the work. What is the work that needs to be done? And what is the best way to do that work? Because in the future, right, the word hybrid is no longer about, do I get to work in the office or do I get to work in the office? Now we're talking about hybrid is, what part of this work is human and what part of this work is non-human. And HR is a great opportunity to say, in the work of the future, here's what that is. And from a workforce plan perspective, the first one is augmentation. How do I become more efficient, faster? We're not really doing anything new. We're just doing it better, faster, cheaper. It's dependent on the person in the job. Then we're re-engineering, kind of redefining it. And then in a very, very small instance, we're reinventing and coming up with, wow, right? Agentic AI and so forth. In the use of technology and having work begin to, take the place maybe, and there's a lot of work literature now around early career and how entry level is being impacted. What most people aren't
Yeah.
talking about is from a 5, 10, 15-year horizon. What happens now where those very jobs that were the feeders for your future leaders, you're not hiring a bench in 2025. So what happens in 2030 when all those jobs are open and there's no
Today's
bench?
entry level is tomorrow's mid-level manager.
So
Yeah.
very few organizations from a
Yeah.
workforce planning, I think historically has been a gap. with what we're experiencing now, that will become a chasm.
Mhm. And I think some of them, just from a maturity standpoint, aren't
That was
there
the
yet.
negative. I'm going to give you the positive. Does it all have to be like this beautiful systemic tech stack and so forth? There are just some really practical, pragmatic things you can do. For instance, if you have 40 portfolio companies, that's 40 leadership teams. On average, you have 7 people on each one of those leadership teams. That's 280 leaders that you have on your team, right? And I'm just doing basic math. I'm
Yeah.
just pulling this out. Given
Yeah.
the volatility and so forth, let's say you have 20% leadership turnover on an annualized basis, so you know what that is. So if I did my math correctly, that's 56 people that on an annual basis, you're probably going to have to replace. And you could probably even look at
Yeah.
those 56 people and say, typically the volatility is in these 3 job families: my go-to-market, my product, whatever it is. What I'm going to start to do is I'm not going to wait for the opening. I'm actually going to start networking and having relationships in those communities, finding out where they hang out from a LinkedIn and from a social perspective, and begin to put things in front of them so that we're building the relationship, so that when said opportunity, exists, we already have 2 or 3, 4. And I actually have some PE clients who, again, they don't have a huge ATS, and creating what was the
You
one?
don't have
Yeah,
to.
it's
Yeah.
what was Avanade? I think Avanade was the big one, years ago from a sourcing and CRM perspective. No, it's just, look, just do that simple math and start being proactive about it. You can systematize it later. The other thing that I find from a technology perspective, what happens when you automate bad process? You get to the wrong answer faster, right?
Yes.
Right.
Congratulations. Yes.
Congratulations. Um,
And you're probably
yeah,
frustrated and you had a terrible
yeah.
experience getting there.
Because pipelining is not a new concept. I mean, we talk about with our sales teams all the time, right? Top of the funnel, bottom of the
Mhm.
funnel. It's the same exact thing. I wrote a blog probably 2 years ago now, 3 years ago. A young lady who left Salesforce posted her resignation letter on LinkedIn. It was pretty controversial. I think it was during COVID. And the whole concept was, if your market brand doesn't match your employment brand, that is not an issue of skill, that is an issue of will. If you have all the skills, knowledge, and resources to build that phenomenal brand, employment branding is just an offshoot of that. I'm just focused on a different market. What's my employee value proposition and so forth to build that? If you have one and you don't have the other, it's because you have not deemed it important. Pipelining is not a new concept. If you're not taking a more proactive approach to pipelining talent, is because for whatever reason, you haven't deemed it important enough. The companies, whether PE or publicly traded, that will win on the other side are the ones that are actually talking and thinking about it now. Like, because you can't
100%.
pipeline when you have the opening. That's called executive search.
Well, it absolutely takes a long time. It's expensive. They can actually work with you on the front end to be much more strategic and get the talent they want. There's also a level of actually ownership where I've also seen HR, it's your job to go build those pipelines. If you have executives who have a level of ownership in their own personal network and they're building that pipeline, they see their role as a talent leader. I mean, that probably makes that job a lot easier too.
And Rich, I think it's a huge opportunity for us in an HR standpoint. There are some fundamental concepts that the business uses in running, growing, and scaling a business, that the concepts themselves or the construct applies directly to so for instance, pipelining, right? We just talked about that, right? Top of the funnel down. The other one for me is, do we buy it or do we build it? Buying it is, if I'm a disruptor, I'm going to find who's got share and a presence in a brand, and I'm going to acquire them, and I'm going to do a tuck in because I basically just bought my way into that market. And it's quicker. And if I'm not as product centric, where I'm trying to develop the next great thing and so forth. And I had a great client who did a phenomenal job of that. And then the second part of that is, do I build it, right? Do I actually use my front end and my back end team to develop it and so forth? And actually, I have a
Mhm.
client now who said, develop from within. And we talked about, hey, if you're going to not have this early career, you're going to have a build problem that you need to be solving
Yeah.
for. Or, you know what, on this one, very definitive skill, niche skill, or I don't have the time, I got to go buy it. Business is doing it. We can do it. I have a CEO of one of my clients right now. He said, I'm going to give you a third one. He says, rent it. And he says, because sometimes what I need that very specific skill to help us solve a very specific problem. And once I have the solution, my team can handle it, but I don't have the time to develop the solution. I need an expert.
We used to call it borrow, but
Yeah, right. And
yeah.
and and
And then you have bots.
yeah, yeah, right, exactly. And in our world, that would be a contractor,
Yeah.
that would be a consultant, whatever it may be. But I look at that and I think, the opportunity for us from an HR standpoint is how do we translate the constructs the business is already using and used to talking about and put it in the terms of talent and people?
When, I was at Cummins, our role was to be the supply chain of
Yeah.
people, and, I mean, leave it to a manufacturing company to think about it that way, but absolutely is true. How do you make sure we have the right talent in the right place, the right
Mhm,
time? Let me pivot a little bit because I do think there's that element from a candidate standpoint. They should look at the leadership that they might go work for, right? Do they own talent pipelines? Are they really networked in the industry? Who you work for matters. And like if they aren't a talent leader, they're also probably not going to be a talent developer.
mhm.
If that's what you want in your role, think about that. For executives who are like listening, if they want to build a relationship with someone like you, what's the best way to start that conversation to open the door?
I'm going to use a funny, right? When my son was never going to be a professional basketball player because, he's his dad's height, right? So, but, but during middle school, he played in a recreational basketball league. And for whatever reason, he was
Mhm,
just afraid to shoot the ball. He would always pass it. And I would say, hey, Luke, what percentage of the shots that you don't take are you ever going to make? And the answer obviously is 0%. Shoot the ball, right?
mhm,
So why did I use that metaphor or analogy? The best way to do it is to reach out to ask to have a conversation in a very transparent, authentic way. Probably 50% of the candidates that I talk to are not in my niche space. People know us.
Oh,
When they
interesting,
come in and
really?
say, I'm considering, we get a lot of inbound from a PE perspective, post exit, transaction,
Mm,
and so forth. Part of it is just reaching out to have the conversation. And what I've also seen very astute executives enter it with a very mutual expectation relative to I know as an executive, I have a very strong network. I need your help. I want to have a conversation and would love to see how I might be able to help you as well. Whether they're able to or not, it's just that willingness and that understanding that says, hey, this is mutual. Let's have a mutually beneficial conversation amongst colleagues. Most people like me in my line of work, if they take what I call a long ball view to this business, it's, our, when we started
mhm.
this thing called Blue Rock, now Blue Rock Human Capital 10 years ago, was changing lives and organizations one relationship at a time, relationships built to last. People who have that approach to the business will take your call. And and
Yeah.
here's what I will tell you, Mr. and Mrs. Executive. If they won't, that also tells you something. I'll give you a great example, and I won't say who the executive is because I coach a lot of executives. And they said it's interesting because when I was a CHRO, everybody wanted to be on the phone with me. Now that I'm a CHRO in transition, I can't get people to return my call. Publicly traded CHRO. Here's the thing, and it's tough. We talked about the psychological and emotional. It's okay to ask for help. But it's not, hey, I'm a rock star. I had a conversation like this once, and I was talking to GE trained general manager, great paper, great background, and so forth. But after a 30-minute conversation, it was very, very obvious to me that said candidate thought that the benefit and privilege was all mine to be on the phone with them. So, from that perspective, not taking anything away from their background, but the approach here
Yeah.
is if you are in transition and you're with a career coach, an executive search firm, and so forth, that's what we do. I can't go out and run a $500 million software business. Never been there, never done that. But I've been doing this for 20 years. And as you're going through it, there are some value adds. So it's really taking the approach that says, I need help. I think you're someone who can help me. Are you open to that kind of conversation?
Humility, being humble, appreciation, some of those things. Yeah. And approaching it from a relationship standpoint, I think is very important. I think there's a lot of transactional in the recruiting space, and it's also what leaves, people with a bad taste in their mouth.
Even myself with my own calendar, these days, I have a really hard time getting to everyone, even when we're done with searches and, maintain the relationship and so forth. So I've had to be very diligent in terms of delegating with my team and so forth so I can spend time, on some of those value added activities. In that particular instance, for me, as I'm prioritizing my time, it's what's the
Mhm.
approach? My industry gets a really bad rap for being transactional. I hear it all the time. It's an earned reputation. That being said, we're also in a marketplace where all sides can be equally as transactional, right? The search the, the
Absolutely.
search organization does not have the market cornered. Candidates can be transactional, clients can be transactional, search firms can be transactional. The thing for me is, to your point, right? That human centeredness approach is, if you're taking the approach that says you want to have a relationship and I'm a relationship person, I'm going to take that on. It's an old movie, right? It's a circle. So,
It is.
I'm going to use
100%.
you as an example. I mean, I think you and I, as we've evolved our relationship, 2 years ago, we didn't know each other.
No.
Now you're a friend who's putting me on the hot seat on a podcast.
But you were willing to take a risk with me to do that, which I just so much love. Probably should have mentioned this, that like, this is not sponsored, right? Like, I invited Ruben on this podcast because he's got really good things to share that I think is gonna help the audience, right? Just kind of broadly. There is no paid product placement here. 100% authentic and entirely part of what kind of the relationship, how those like morph and change. The other thing I think when people connect with, and I've coached a few folks through this even in the last like few months, they're not sure if they can come back. They're not sure how to stay on your radar. What's a good way for people to stay on your radar? I know Ruben does private equity, and I might send a note to him about something that I saw, or, "Hey, I noticed this shift in the industry." What are your recommendations for if people wanna stay on your radar, or they wanna be remembered for when that next right role comes up?
Great question. And I've watched people who do it fairly well with me. The two primary ones, LinkedIn really helps, from that perspective.
Mm,
If it is someone that you want to quote unquote stay on their radar, is I would watch their feed and their posts and comment. And that's
okay.
actually mutually beneficial because, one, obviously, you're staying on the person's radar because we watch who reviews our posts and comments and so forth. But the other piece is, from a LinkedIn algorithm perspective, your activity as that person also boosts you on the LinkedIn algorithms. The more active you are in LinkedIn in those dialogues, the better you do within this thing called LinkedIn. So you're actually killing two birds with one stone. You're staying connected and top of mind with whoever that person is, but you're also improving your algorithm on LinkedIn. So
Yeah, that's a good
that's the
nugget.
first one. And then, what I have found, and as a young man out of Phoenix, Arizona, and without fail, about every 45 days, it's a very simplistic email and says, "Hey, just want to let you know, I'm still in the process." Always includes the LinkedIn URL to his LinkedIn. I know who he is. I placed him many years ago, and I don't forget those things, but he's not even putting that to chance. Just in case you forgot, here's my LinkedIn URL. And every 45 days, I get that notice.
Good, that's good to know, 45
Yeah.
days. So there's a
Yeah.
discipline to it.
So,
Mhm.
and that's basically 6 weeks. You could do it 12 times, monthly and so forth. But I think the key piece is, you don't want to personalize. And I'll just use myself as an example. I may not be able to talk to you every month, but it doesn't mean I don't want to hear from you every month. If I tell you when said opportunity comes up, I'm going to call you, we're going to call you. Because sometimes it's, hey, I'm still out there. And this goes to the psychological piece. When can we talk? Because I'm ready. It's just that careful balance that says, help me remember you so that I don't forget and I have it top of mind. I say this from a client perspective because our clients have lots of responsibilities, CHROs, and so forth. It's not their job to remember me. It's my job to make sure they don't forget me.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
Because in the scheme of things, if I'm dealing with the CHRO for a publicly traded company, honestly, they have a lot of Rubens that they deal with, particularly with the Shrek firms and so forth, but they also have huge
Yep.
jobs, right? So I
Yeah.
can't personalize that they didn't think about me last month or whatever it is. And I learned this lesson many years ago. So you call somebody, you've got a great relationship, they're in a decision maker, they had an opening, they went to search, and then you call
Mhm.
them, the next week, and they're like, "Man, I wish you would have called me last week because we just went to search." That's not on them. They didn't do it to slight me or anything of that nature. Is we didn't do a good
No,
job of staying top of mind.
that's a really good point. It's, yeah, sales, but in a different way. Okay, let me pivot to future before I let you go because I feel like I could talk to you about this
Me
forever.
too.
What what are the macro or, like, big kind of behavioral trends do you think are gonna shape the leadership and executive search in the future? Aside from this, like, AI savviness, of course, but
Yeah, but
there's so
I'm
much.
going to hit on that one first because it's interesting, Rachel. I think
Mhm.
if you think about, the 90s and the early 2000s, we would have descriptors like org savvy, tech savvy, right? And so forth. So the new tech savvy is, for me, when you think about it from an AI perspective, you have to be educated and enlightened on what this thing is. So there's organizations now that they are actually building in, regardless of the job and the family and the function, what is your AI competency? So it's no longer something you choose to do. The expectation is you know how to do that as part of your job, and you're bringing that skill with you into the building. Because if I'm an employer and I'm looking at that and I want a future workforce that can truly help us do this thing next level, what are you guys doing from an AI perspective? We can make HR much more efficient, and usually it relates to headcount, and all the rest of those things. The progressive CHROs is saying AI is actually about org effectiveness and how do we apply it in all functional areas when we look at the work and how do we do it and how do we work differently. We can drive it from a change management standpoint, but this isn't just for HR. The piece
Mhm.
for me is I don't care what job level or job family in, you have to be.
You have to
Yeah, I
have
was
it.
gonna say you have to have working knowledge of said topic, right? Is remember the old
Okay.
days when we say I'm not bilingual, but I have, working knowledge or functional fluency in said language, right? So
Mhm.
same exact thing.
Mhm.
This is now a job requirement because it applies in every step. I think the second one is really being able to have a really good understanding of right now, because I think this is a huge shift, and AI is impacting it. The 5-year horizon that we talk about now is what used to take 15 to 20 years, right? So everything we're talking about,
Oh, that's really an
yeah.
interesting
So
point of
so
view,
it's like,
Ruben.
look, when I talk to you about the next 5 years, it's not, kind of like 3 to 5 year plan. No, no, look, I forgot what the numbers are, so I'm going to misquote them, but it's close enough. There's a stat that says in the next 5 years, there are 120 million jobs, I think it is. All of these jobs are going to be eliminated, quote unquote. That's the bad
Yeah,
news, right?
and, like, 50% of the jobs that exist in 2030 don't exist
That's in
today.
5 years, right? So
It's
remember
wild.
we talked about,
Yeah.
the language of PE is speed and so forth. Is as an executive, you have to have a renewed understanding that 5 years in today's world is fundamentally different. And am I ready for that? And can I demonstrate how I'm already doing that?
Yeah.
Like, because if you're
Yeah.
still looking at a 5-year plan the way you looked at it 10, 15 years ago, you're running the risk of being obsolete.
What's the role of things like an emotional intelligence or empathy? The human aspect has been a big theme, particularly like at conferences this fall. Are they talking about that in the leadership, C-suite? Are they playing a different role now? They're being valued differently, those sort of softer skills?
What's happening now from a human capital perspective in PE is realizing that human capital is a fundamental lever in value creation, right? So how do we get to said outcome
Hmm.
3 years, 5 years, 8 years, and so forth?
100%. Yeah.
Particularly in services and tech-enabled services businesses, what is that leadership team, and how do they inspire, enable, and bring those teams from a talent perspective? Right? It's not just about the P and L and the balance sheet, because the team is what's actually going to get you there. There's a company out of Canada that actually has a whole simulated model for how do you put a CEO in that construct and see how they perform with the human element side of it. Because human capital has become such a recognized factor that says, here's how we get to where we're going to get to, a lot more focus on it from an EI perspective, emotional
Mhm.
intelligence, all of the large firms, and I know they value it because they're all doing some level of assessment on the front end, whether it's, a predictive
That's
index,
interesting.
Hogan
Yeah.
leadership series. I run into that one quite a bit. I do it on my 90% of my HR searches. And anytime I see a CEO search, there is some level of assessment around said topic, more so than publicly traded.
Yeah, I've seen GH Smart in there quite a bit lately, and I think they have psychologists actually deliver that one.
I have one client that you do the paper and pencil, and then you spend 4 hours with the IO psych person.
Man.
And they do that for everyone at the fund level
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
CEOs and their direct reports.
Honestly, probably saves them from some bad hires, that wouldn't have been a good fit. Okay, I'm squeezing in one last question. The member of our audience, they are a senior level person and they're thinking about looking. What is the one practice you want them to take away from this, or the one piece of
Gonna
advice?
sound horribly simple. Start with the end in mind. And what I mean by that is, as you think about what you want to do and what that next job looks like, you have to be very definitive around what that is, because then everything you do builds from that, right? And Rachel, you and I have talked about, for instance, we use the prioritized resume format. And I
Yeah.
redo a lot of resumes. Most executives have all the information already. It's an origami. We work the puzzle. But
Mhm.
because when you start with that and you say, okay, I want to be the CHRO of a publicly traded or non publicly traded $1 billion company, because I've been doing HR for 20 years, I know that for a job like that, they're going to evaluate things like org design, org effectiveness, M&A, culture change management. These days we call them superpowers. The old days we used to call them core competencies. Once you decide what that job is, you can then say, the core competencies that the market evaluates for that job is this. So I'm now going to highlight for the market how I've done that. And I'm going to put that
Mhm.
squarely page one from the beginning to the bottom third of my resume. Anything that tells you, Mr. or Mrs. Recruiter, that I could do that job, you're going to see that. I'm not going to make you wait for page number 2 because you might not ever get there.
Yeah, it's a
So
good
it
point.
start with that job, because then you build from that. And then when you're done for that, right? 15 years ago, your first impression was your resume. That was kind of how we went to market. Now it's your LinkedIn profile. And so then you take that and say, does my LinkedIn profile speak to that audience as well in a very clear, concise fashion? And oh, by the way, this is a small tip, micro to this macro question. You're the CEO of a software business, or you're the CHRO of an industrial manufacturing business. And so I see head of HR, but you don't give me anything that tells me anything about your remit in that job and who you reported to. So all I see is a title as I go through, just a couple of extra lines, draw me the picture. Because what I'm doing on your LinkedIn profile is I'm doing exactly what I do on your resume. I'm doing a quick scan to see size, scale, and scope. Yes, this is a person that I
Yeah.
want to talk to. The most valuable piece of real estate is that section called title block right under your picture. LinkedIn defaults
Mhm.
that to the title, your current title and your current job. You can actually take that section and divide it and use it to identify those core competencies that the market evaluates, which when a researcher is looking for candidates, we call them keywords.
Yes, use some SEO things in there and make sure it's aligned. It doesn't have to be what you do
Yeah.
today.
So when
Mhm.
you start definitive, make the decision, I want to be this, and then all of the work you kind of reverse engineer it. But it starts with, you just have to decide, well, I want to do this, but I'll take this. The minute you say that, we're going to have a conversation and say, how about we have that conversation in about 6 months if you're still in the market, because you got to go after this.
Well, this is amazing. Thank you for just being so generous and sharing so much of your knowledge with the audience. I'm sure this is going to help a ton of people. And to your resume note, there are free resume templates also on the Shift Show website. People can just download for free that actually captures what Ruben just talked about in that first 2/3 of your page, that a leader is not going to make it to your second page, that folks can, download as
Yeah, and
well.
then Rachel, consistent with what we talked about, anybody who, wants to reach out with a question and so forth,
Yeah,
please feel free
I
to.
was gonna where can people find
Quickest,
you?
easiest way, obviously, my LinkedIn profile, but our company website is bluerockhumancapital.com. Email address is Ruben at bluerockhumancapital.com. Quick email. And, we've got a
Awesome.
phenomenal team. I tell my team all the time, I'm far from being the smartest person in the room anymore. I'm just now one of the oldest. Right? So whether it's me or somebody on my team, we aspire to be certified human friendly, and we've not lost that. We use all every technology with the best of them, but at the end of the day, this is a relationship business. And that's what I love about it. And that's what our firm does.
And you guys show up that way for sure. We'll link all that stuff in the show notes too and make sure everybody knows how to get there. And thank you again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.